Hi, welcome to session 46, Non-Tariff Barriers. I'll be hosting the session and we'll be giving 2-minute reminders to the presenters. And Janine Pelikan will be the session chair. So without further ado, I'll leave the floor to you, Janine. Thanks.
Many thanks, Zeynep. Yes, also from my side, welcome to this session today. And I think it's going to be a very interesting session because in this session we will see different approaches, different countries, different sectors of NTMs and everything combined in one session. So from the method side, we will see a gravity model, a CGE model, and the gravity model which will put results into the CGE model or transfer the results and coefficient. And also from the country side, we will see a worldwide focus of NTMs. We will see them in a country case study by Nepal, and different trade agreements about the EU, the US and Korea, and also the UK-Japan trade agreement. And in terms of products and sectors, we will see NTMs in agriculture and manufacturers, as well as in services. So it's going to be a very interesting session on NTMs. I'm very much looking forward to all 4 presentations within the session. And I would like to ask Tereza Rusova, who is the first speaker in the row, to present her paper, which is titled, "How Well Have Free Trade Agreements Performed in Reducing Non-Tariff Barriers?" So I'm looking forward to your presentation, Tereza.
Great, thank you very much. I hope my internet connection is good enough. We're struggling a bit, so do let me know. I can turn my camera off. But I think it should be okay now. I'm using my hotspots. Right, so let me share my screen. And I hope you can all see it. Great, thank you. So hello everyone. Sorry, I missed the introductions. So I'm sure I have been introduced, but I'm Tereza. I work at the UK Department for International Trade, and I've put together a paper that looks into and kind of evaluates how effective free trade agreements have been in reducing non-tariff measures. And we've estimated this using the gravity model of international trade. So in terms of background and context, I'm sure some of you will be familiar with this. The non-tariff measures, or NTMs, are a key input for CG modeling. However, they are quite challenging to estimate, and especially when you get quite disaggregated. So we have estimated them on GTAP 65 level. And obviously, the more granular you get, the more challenging it gets as well. And this is also in contrast to other inputs, such as tariffs, which are kind of readily available for modeling. As a result, a lot of CG models have to rely on blanket reduction assumptions. So this is to say that you will see similar reduction or the same reductions across different sectors. So for example, assuming a blanket agriculture reduction across all agriculture services, which is kind of unlikely to hold in practice. So kind of taking all this together, we at the UK Department for International Trade want to improve the way that we estimate NTMs for the purposes of CG modeling. And this is kind of one way of kind of exploring new methodologies that we can employ in doing so. And we decided to follow the Bayer et al. Approach from 2019 that kind of estimated the impact of FTAs in a similar setting. We contribute to the existing literature mainly in 2 ways. So we kind of break down the traditional group of trade costs into tariff and non-tariff measures by controlling for tariffs. But we also estimate NTMs on quite a granular level. So we estimate them on GTAP 65 level, and we also look at 3 different scenarios. So we first look at average FTAs, that is kind of looking at all different FTAs in our sample that spans from 2000 to 2016. We then look at 2 individual agreements, and that is EU-Korea and US-Korea. And we also allow for directional impacts to differ. So this is to say that the NTMs faced by Korean exporters to the EU will be different to the NTM reduction faced by the EU exporters in Korea. And as I said, the ultimate goal of this exercise is to explore new methodologies and kind of improve the estimates that we provide for CG modeling at the department. So in terms of high-level conclusions of this exercise, I would like to note that all the results that I will be presenting today should be understood as kind of results before we account for general equilibrium effects. In gravity modeling literature, or kind of in the gravity modeling space, this means that we are not accounting for third country effects because we're doing just kind of estimation and kind of first step in gravity modeling. So we're just estimating, looking backwards, the coefficient on kind of the FTA variable here. If we wanted to account for third country effects, we would need to run kind of a second stage regression, which we don't do in this case. And then in terms of the actual results that we have found, when we look at the average FTA scenario, so again, this is looking at all the kind of FTAs in our sample from 2000 to 2016. Those tend to give us results that are lower in magnitude, so lower percentage reductions in NTMs compared to looking at kind of individual agreements. And this is mostly due to the fact that there are fewer observations in our sample when we look at those individual FTAs. And in terms of the results, when we look at the average FTA results, specifically in the goods sectors, those tend to be kind of in line with what we would probably expect to see, i.e. we would expect to see a reduction in NTM following a free trade agreement being signed. We do find that in some services sectors, there are some kind of NTM increases, which I will get into a bit more detail later on, but this is mainly due to probably due to a quirk of ITPD to GTAP 65 mapping, which we had to do using our data set. So I probably wouldn't read into this as a trend. This is more of a concordance issue. Then when we look at the 2 FTAs, so EU-Korea and US-Korea FTAs, and compare the results to what was expected, kind of ex ante before or during the negotiations, and those kind of expectations were outlined by the EU and the European Commission and US ITC. We kind of find that we do see reductions in the sectors that were highlighted as kind of sectors of focus for the FTA. So in terms of the model setup and the model, the theory behind the model, the gravity model really aims to capture the relationship between trade flows and their determinants. So in other words, we kind of regress trade flows between 2 countries, I and J in this case, on kind of determinants of those trade flows between those 2 countries. Those tend to be things like GDP. So those are kind of the pull factors, but they can be also things like trade costs, so more of the push factors. So those are things like tariffs or things like distance. And in our data, in our model, we use ITPD, an ITPD data set combined with tariff data sourced from the World Bank WITS database. And it covers years 2000 to 2016 and 243 countries in total. We also map on HS6, between HS6 and HS4 level of aggregation, kind of using a network approach. I would encourage you to look at the paper. There's a bit more detail on that in there. In terms of, I'll show you kind of the actual regression in a second, but in terms of kind of the gravity theory, so kind of bridging gravity theory and gravity practice, gravity modeling, comes with a number of challenges. And we have kind of overcome them in line with best practice in gravity modeling. So these challenges include things like omitted variable bias, endogeneity of trade policy, working with data sets with zero trade flows, heteroscedasticity problems, and also the fact that there's kind of a general tendency of trade to increase over time due to globalization. So in terms of accounting for omitted variable bias, we include exporter year and importer year fixed effects, and these kind of control for the time invariant country characteristics. So things like GDP or some kind of institutional setup that is kind of specific to that particular country. In terms of controlling for endogeneity, we do that in two ways. So first of all, we include pair fixed effects. So those are fixed effects between the two kind of trading partners, which control for the relationship between them, or the kind of the time invariant characteristics between those two countries. So those are things like distance, time, kind of time difference, or historical links, or if they have been, if one of them was a former colony of the other. And this kind of it reduces endogeneity, i.e. the fact that two countries that have historical links are more likely to sign a free trade agreement to start with. We also adjust for tariffs. So we adjust the trade flow that we regress on all of these variables using the formula in equation 2. And this is kind of in line with existing literature as well. To overcome the problem of zero trade flows and heteroscedasticity, we use PPML, the PPML estimator. We also use a globalization dummy that is interactive with the border variable to account for the fact that trade does have a tendency to increase over time. So in terms of the model specification, we have kind of two different setups that we're working with. The first one, which is outlined in equation 3, is looking at the effect of the average FTA. So as I said, that is the average FTA in our sample that spans from 2000 to 2016, i.e. it wouldn't affect the effect of countries joining the EU prior to 2000. And so this is kind of the average FTA variable, so beta 1, is kind of capturing that, controlling for tariffs. The beta 1 is capturing the reduction in the NTM. And in beta 2 and beta 3, we're controlling for globalization and also for the fact that whether the country is a member of the EU, and this is more of a interpretational point. We kind of controlled for that to highlight that an average FTA is unlikely to be as deep as a country joining EU, because that is obviously kind of unprecedented level of trading relationship. We're also including the 3 fixed effects I mentioned, so that's importer year, exporter year, and pair fixed effects. In equation 4, we are kind of looking at, so this is kind of the second specification, so that this is the specification that is looking at individual FTAs. And this one concretely is looking at the EU-Korea, Korea-EU FTA. So beta 3 and beta 4 will be capturing that NTM reduction, and everything else is the same as before. So in terms of limitations of this approach, as you will see, there will be, as obviously we go more granular, so looking at individual FTAs at GTAP 65 level, we increase the noisiness and of the data and of the observations. And as I said before, the results that we present should be interpreted as partial, i.e. before controlling for third country effects. What this means is that the EU-Korea FTA is unlikely to just affect EU-Korea. It's most likely to have an effect on large trading partners such as the US or, for example, Germany. So there will be some kind of knock-on impact that we can kind of see as a result of the FTA, but we are not capturing that in our model. So there's also the fact that trade policy takes a while to happen. So we are only kind of allowing for one effect to take place, but we could sort of phase this out. And also could be that that some of the trade or some of the actual reduction in the NTM is not directly captured by the model. And that is because we are inferring the reduction through or via a change in trade flows. And it could be that some reduction or like some increase in trade flow that we would expect doesn't happen. Perhaps exporters, even though it's cheaper for them to export, decide not to and use the money another way, for example. We could also, because we are trying to control for things like endogeneity, to the extent we can. So we are using per fixed effect, we do the tariff adjustments. There could be some endogeneity left in the model because trade policy could be still endogenous in the setting. We also use GTAP Armingtons on the GTAP 65 level for the tariff adjustment, but kind of as suggested by the literature, this should be kind of a trade elasticity. But we have kind of, there are other examples where authors have used them kind of interchangeably, so we follow that. In terms of results, so first of all, just looking at the average FTA results, and these are all presented in this in the graphs at the bottom of the slide in ad-valorem equivalent terms. So in other words, the NTM is presented in terms, in percentage terms, and it is kind of presented in a way that we're saying the NTM would have 10% impact on trade, which is the same as a 10% tariff. And we present these at GTAP 65, as I said, GTAP 65 level, and in this case, we are only presenting significant results. So looking at the graph here at the bottom of the slide, we can see kind of roughly three clusters. So the left-hand corner, we can see reductions in agricultural NTMs, which tend to be of high magnitude compared to the kind of middle cluster, which is, these tend to be the kind of manufacturing NTMs. And those manufacturing NTMs to be slightly lower magnitude and tend to be kind of clustered together. This is a trend that we can see throughout the different scenarios we have looked at. So also when it comes to the individual FTAs. And then, as I kind of pointed out earlier, we see some NTM increase in some services sectors. So you can see the four kind of dots in the same line on the right-hand side in the corner. Those map onto the same kind of ITPD sector in our core data. So we kind of have to map onto GTAP 65 level to do this modeling. So as I said, this probably is more of a concordance quirk rather than a trend. But we can also see kind of in business services and also in financial services. So those are kind of the reductions in the right-hand corner, so OFI and OBS. Those two sectors have shown a reduction as well. So in terms of the EU-Korea FTA, so for context, so we're kind of moving to the individual FTAs now. And this FTA was applied from 2011, and it mainly targeted automotives, pharma, medical devices, and electronic sectors. And when looking at the results, so again, as I said, there's a bit of a similar trend going on here with the manufacturing reduction kind of clustered together of similar magnitudes, and then we have kind of the services increases in the right-hand corner. But in terms of the sectors that the FTA targeted, we indeed saw a reduction in the automotive sector of roughly 12% in AV terms, in the electronic sectors as well. Then looking at the NTMs faced by Korean exporters to the EU, again in AV terms, we saw a reduction in chemicals, then also some agriculture sectors as well. And there was an increase in the electronic sectors NTM faced by Korean exporters. And we saw the automotive sector come up as insignificant. And then as our last example, looking at the US-Korea FTA, which came into force in 2012, this FTA had kind of aimed to have more of a cross-sectoral impact and aimed to harmonize kind of automotive testing and standards, but also targeted data flow liberalization, and that was kind of across a lot of services including finance and legal. So in terms of the actual results so this is US exporters to Korea, so NTMs faced by US exporters when entering the Korea market. We can see a reduction in NTMs in the automotive sector, as well as manufacturing and electronics. So this is kind of in line with what the FTA was targeting. But also there was some reduction in agriculture. And we also see a reduction in business services and financial services, which were again targeted via the data liberalization provisions.
2 minutes.
Great, thank you. And in terms of the NTMs faced by Korean exporters to the US, so we can see kind of a similar story in terms of the automotive sector, and also manufacturing and equipment, as well as kind of electronics. And we also saw an increase in the manufacturing of computers. Then in terms of the services sectors, we kind of struggled with significant issues in this one. So again, there's a similar kind of trend in those 4 sectors as I highlighted before, and kind of financial and business services came out as insignificant. So in terms of conclusions, we have estimated the impact of past FTAs on NTMs across GTAP 65 sectors, with the ambition to kind of move away from blanket reductions. And as you could see, the average FTA roughly gives results of lower magnitude, and we kind of saw across the board reductions in the goods sectors, as opposed to kind of the service sectors, which sometimes come with increases in NTMs. We looked at 2 specific scenarios. That was US Korea and EU Korea. And those FTAs targeted specific sectors, mostly manufacturing of automotive sector and electronics, and those sectors tend to come up as those that saw NTM reductions as well. There are some kind of increases that we saw, which tend to be likely to one, limited number of observations as we get more granular, and also the nature of ITP to GTAP 65 mapping. We still need to improve the reliability of the estimates, essentially to make them operational in the context of CG modeling, and that is mainly to resolve the issue of insignificance. So currently, I think we get around half, or just over a half of our results significant, but obviously we would like to increase that as much as we can. And I think that's everything for me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tereza, for this nice and interesting presentation. So I think a lot of food for discussion now. And I see also a hand, Lars Nielsen, please.
Thanks, Janine. Thanks, Tereza, for the presentation. I find this to be very interesting, and we are in very much need of this type of estimations, because if we can move away from ad hoc assumptions in terms of NTM reductions, that would be fantastic. So first, I just want to highlight one thing that we did in the European Commission, an ex post evaluation of our free trade agreement with Korea. I think it was published 4 or 5 years ago, and that could be interesting for you if you haven't seen it already. What I found to be very interesting from that study, and also from your study, is that you find reductions in NTBs in sectors where the agreement doesn't say that there are any NTB reductions. Because if we read the agreement, you will see that in certain sectors there are no provisions lowering NTBs. And still, at the very same time, our own study found that there are reductions in trade costs that go beyond the tariff reductions only. You find the same thing, which leads me to believe that there's something else that we're picking up here. I don't know if you're going to call it NTMs, but there is some trade facilitation, some increase in contacts between operators. There is something in addition to the standard way of thinking of NTMs that I think are being picked up by your estimates. So if we go back to the pure agreement approach, that would actually indicate that the reductions in NTBs would be the same in both directions. I mean, there is, well, no, not necessarily. No, sorry about that. It could be that one party actually makes other type of concessions than the compared to the other parts. So forget about that. That's not correct. So coming to a couple of questions then to you. Are you going to use these estimates that you have in the future? Is that the plan for where you work? And then are you going to use the sort of average estimate that you found, and you'll plug that into your CGE modeling, including the increase in NTMs in services? That's an interesting question. And then I would also like to know, which is also part, I think, for the larger modeling communities, in a sense, how to implement these. I mean, if you do it as an ADE, you end up with tariff revenue. You might not want to do that. You do it with the AMS in GTAP, you end up having usually huge impacts of the AMS compared to anything else. Well, I'll stop there. Thank you very much for your presentation and for your work.
Thanks a lot. Yes, I'm familiar with the paper. I followed that quite closely as I was working on this. So this is great that you've turned up. It's amazing. So in terms of the reductions in sectors where we wouldn't expect them, this is an interesting one. And I guess, like, because we're inferring the NTM reduction from a trade flow increase, right? There will be something that is a cross-sectorial, arguably. So even though you might be benefiting some agriculture sectors, that might have a knock-on impact on, you know, beverages or food manufacturing or something like that. So I guess it's like that kind of sectorial impact that feeds through, not through the model, but through the data, if that makes sense. And then the model picks it up and attributes that as some kind of liberalization in that particular sector. So that would be like my explanation as to why that happens. So you will see a liberalization in a number of sectors at the same time, I would say, even though they're not directly targeted by the FTA. And then in terms of, hopefully I'm going to answer all of your questions. In terms of the plan that we have, so this was kind of, we want to explore a number of different methodologies with the, as I said, with the aim of making the NTM reductions as tailored to whatever FTA we're modeling at the time. Obviously, because we are getting quite a few insignificant results here, we kind of need to look into that and improve that first before we can actually use that in modeling. And the issue with the increase, I probably would not plug that into a CG model, to be completely honest. I don't know what that would do. But as I said, like, the problem might be mainly due to the concordance. So that maybe we can like group them up in a way that you aggregate a couple of services sectors and kind of see what that does. And hopefully, that should capture more of the actual reduction, which we would expect to see. But then again, I think what was quite interesting for me to see in kind of the services sectors that are probably most significant for the UK, which are like financial services or the business services, we do tend to see mostly reductions. So that's kind of like, because that's a good sign on that. And then I'm not a CG modeler, so I'm not entirely sure how the question around tariff revenue. I always kind of assume that's because it's an NTM. At least I think in our model, there's a provision for that there not to be any tariff revenue. But I could be completely wrong about that one. I think I answered all of your questions, but let me know if I missed anything out.
Yeah, many thanks. Also in the chat, there are some questions. Bushra Faizi is asking you, he's first of all saying that you did a very nice presentation, and then she's asking, are you estimating the ABEs of NTMs in both goods and services? If yes, what is the approach? Maybe you can say a word about that.
Yes, we are. So the model is the same for both, but obviously for services, we are not controlling for tariffs because there's no tariffs on services. In terms of the AV conversion, I don't know if you're getting at that as well. We use an AV formula from, I think it's the Toyota Guide to Gravity. So I think I also use that in the paper. So I would encourage you to refer back to it, and I then refer to the guide in terms of the actual conversion.
And there's another question by Umid Samani, which is more related to the methodology you are using. He wonders if you use the Poisson estimator, and maybe what is the advantage over alternative measures like the Heckman in your analysis?
So I think like in gravity, in kind of gravity space, historically it has been mainly OLS that has been used. But because of issues such as zero trade flows, heteroscedasticity, and some other ones that have been like well documented in the literature, PPML is currently the best model, the best estimator to use. There, quite a lot of papers who kind of that go into depth of why that's the case. I'm not an expert on this at all, so I will leave that to them. But it is kind of known and to be understood to be the best practice in gravity modeling to date.
I also have a question and put myself on the list. And this question is about the endogeneity. You say that you will control for tariffs, but is it a kind of a tariff, Ad-valorem tariff equivalent, or do you include, for example, quotas, which are a kind of tariff, but also a kind of non-tariff measure? Are they included in your AVEs or in your tariffs where you control for, or what do you use?
So we don't control for quotas, so that is not controlled for. But yeah, so in my presentation, there was one of the slides that kind of showed the tariff adjustment. So we essentially adjust the trade flow for the tariff. So kind of like, I guess, discount the trade flow. And this is again kind of used on literature. Not everyone does this. I think the Toyota doesn't actually control for tariffs as far as I know. So it kind of is a methodological point, but you can do it through that adjustment.
Okay, many thanks. And I think we have time for one last question. Zeynep, please.
Thanks, Tereza, for this extensive work and your excellent presentation. I'm just curious about the significance. You mentioned, do you have more significant results in the overall estimations, or US, Korea, Europe, EU, Korea? And another is a comment to Lars's point. So in the firm heterogeneity literature, for example, we also deal with NTMs. They're kind of called fixed costs. And there are fixed setup costs that affect all firms the same, and fixed export costs that are affecting bilateral trade specifically. So these NTMs that transcend the specific sector and transcends to all sectors, maybe there could be something, it would be interesting to explore the definition of NTMs that affect all sectors and specific sectors. So it's more of like a definition kind of question, maybe. Thanks.
So on the significance point, we tend to find there to be more significant results when we look at the average FTA. I guess that intuitively makes sense because there's more observations in the sample. So when we look at the average FTA, we essentially take everything that has been signed since between 2000 and 2016. Obviously, when you look at any individual FTA, that will be, in case of US Korea, 4 years of data in the data set. So obviously you reduce the number of observations. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Okay, many thanks on that. So now I would like to move to the next presenter, which will be Muhammad Omer Khan. And I can't see his name here on our list, but is he here in the room?
I don't see his.
Yeah, it doesn't. He's not here. So yeah, we have to go ahead, I think, with the next presentation and hope that he might show up. Maybe some. Have you contact with him, Zeynep? Have you some?
No, I haven't. No, I haven't heard from him. I'll take a look, but in the meantime, we can move on with the third presentation, I think.
Yes, I would suggest that. So sorry for that, but maybe he will show up and we can just switch these presentations then. So Gita, Bhushal, Adhikary is the next presenter on our list, and she will present a paper which is called "Can the Free Trade Agreement Accelerate Nepal's Path Towards Economic Prosperity? An Economic and CGE Model-Based Assessment." So Gita, I'm really much looking forward to your presentation right now.
Yeah, hi everyone. Let me just, okay, it looks okay now. Hello.
It's not in the presentation mode. Maybe you might change that.
Yeah, I want to just change it to the presentation mode. Okay. You are seeing the full screen, right? Now?
Yes, it's not the presentation mode.
It's not?
No.
Really?
No. But we can see your slides. So
I did the presentation mode.
Can you also try from the slideshow tab menu at the top? See if it works. And do you have two screens or one screen?
Yeah, I have two screens, that's why.
Probably then, yes.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the first time it happened. Maybe because of my second screen, sorry about that again.
I guess you can do it from display settings too.
Now it should be okay.
Yes.
yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
perfect.
It was a screen, sorry. Okay, so this is a research paper of one of my objectives. It's can the free trade agreements accelerate Nepal's path towards economic prosperity? It is an econometric and CEPA model-based assessment. Why I'm talking about Nepal? It's my hometown. Plus, Nepal is an agrarian country with more than 66% of its population who is directly engaged in farming, with livestock and agriculture being the largest contributor after service sector. towards GDP. Nepal has started its trade liberalization starting in 1992 with India, and it was the first least developed country to join the WTO, and it has signed 17 different bilateral trade treaties, and it has signed 3 regional FTAs. One is with India, and the second 2 are with SAFTA and BIMSTEC. So, okay, this one, I don't know how to move it. Okay. So what is SAFTA? SAFTA is the South Asian Free Trade Area. It was signed in 2006 and it is currently active with seven different member countries. And its main objective was to cut tariff rates on a product by product basis, and it links the South Asian countries. Coming to BIMSTEC, BIMSTEC is the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multisectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation. It was signed in 2004, but it is only an early announcement and it is still under negotiation. And it has the member countries Nepal, India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Thailand. And its main objective is to establish a more comprehensive FTA through deeper, more substantial sector coverage of services and open and competitive investment design. And it is the only cross-sectional FTA that has been signed by Nepal, which is connecting SAARC member countries with the ASEAN member countries like Myanmar and Thailand. So the only difference between these two FTAs is in SAFTA there is like these 3 member countries, Pakistan, Maldives, and Afghanistan, and in BIMSTEC there are like different member countries other than these 5 countries. These are Myanmar and Thailand. So in this study, when I'm talking about BIMSTEC, I'm talking about these countries, while I'm talking about when I'm talking about SAFTA, I'm talking about these 8 countries, and when I'm talking about BIMSTEC, I'm talking about these countries. But Nepal has very negligible trade flow with like Afghanistan, Maldives, Myanmar. So these 3 countries has been included in rest of Southeast Asia while I was modeling the GTAP model, or I was running the scenarios. So I'm still talking about why I consider Nepal for the study. So it's because it is considered as a least developed countries. And what are least developed countries? They are the low-income countries that are bearing significant difficulties to self-support their economy in a sustainable way. And if you look at the vulnerability index, Nepal was found to be economically susceptible to trade with an index of 28.4 out of 100. And it also ranked on 73rd on the Global Hunger Index with a score of 19.5 for the year 2020. And if the score was like from 19.9 to 20 to something, it will be converted to like severity. So it's like it's not a good scenario for Nepal. And as already mentioned, its livelihood is completely dependent on agriculture. Ironically, it is a landlocked country and it is enormously affected by trade route and limited logistic facilities in itself. So if you look at the Nepal's trade profile from 2001 to 2020, if you look at the export rates, it's just like 2.1 US billion dollars, and in 2020 also it's 2.1. So we can say like its export is not progressing at all if you look at the 20 years period. But if you look at the import, it was just 3.5 US billion dollar. It was like supporting its country a little well, but when it comes to 2020, it has been importing a lot more. It's more than like, it's almost like 400% more than what it was in 2001. So this study has estimated the effect of NTMs on trade in Nepal via a gravity border effect approach. And the second objective was to quantify and analyze the economy-wide impact of tariff and NTMs removal on agricultural sectors. So these were the methodologies I used in my study. The first one is gravity model framework. Then I used the gravity model framework to estimate the coefficient of NTMs. and then I use those coefficient and use the different tariff and non-tariff rates in the GTAP model for this study. So in the gravity model framework, we use the variables by adapting Poisson pseudo maximum likelihood estimator as proposed by Santos Silva and Tenrio. And this was the regression equation that I used to calculate the non-tariff barriers, where I have dependent variable. This is the dependent variable, this production, consumption, distance, landlockness, contiguity, language, and a regional trade agreement. These all were the independent variables, while other remaining variables were also the independent variables. So to estimate the coefficient of NTMs, I use this equation AVE like this one, and in here this one is the Ad-valorem equivalent of border barriers. The BIJ is the border dummy, the coefficient of border dummy, and this is the elasticity of substitution between goods. So this is the one I calculated using the gravity model framework. This alpha, the elasticity of substitution between goods, is what I get from the GTAP model, and then this is how I calculated the Ad-valorem equivalence of border barriers. And coming to the CZE model, we all know it's a multi-region, multi-sector computable general equilibrium model that can capture the interactions between different policy scenarios in different sectors of various regions, countries, and economic perspective. It can also forecast the effect of future policy change in economy, which would nearly be impossible with other economic estimations. And for this study, I use Run GTAP version 10 database based on GEMPAC 11.2 with updated base year 2020, as the baseline year was 2014 in the model. And this study has used percentages in tariffs and non-tariffs as a result of differential tariff cut scenarios with respect to aggregated 30 sectors present in the model. And if we come to the scenarios, I'm not sure how to take this away. Okay. If we come to the scenarios, we have three different scenarios. One is BIMSTEC, one is SAFTA scenario, second is BIMSTEC, third is interaction of SAFTA and BIMSTEC FTAs. And if you look at the experimental SOCs, we use tariff removal, NTMs removal, and combination of both tariff removal and NTMs removal. And for this presentation, I'll be talking more about the combined experimental SOC, NTM removal, and tariff removal combined. So why I looked at SAFTA scenario? Because within the South Asian countries, Nepal has 2 to 9 times higher tariffs for imports. The tariffs should have been within 0.0 to 5% by 2016. It should have already been reduced, but it is not the case, although it's like almost 5 or 6 years more. So by doing this, I believe we'll provide a better picture of what the bilateral trade would look like between SAARC member countries and Nepal if the trade agreements were actually in practice. And coming to the BIMSTEC, because it is still an under negotiation FTA, we'll be exploring the trade effects Nepal can acquire if this FTA was in operation. And interaction of SAFTA and BIMSTEC FTAs is, we'll be looking if both of the FTAs were currently active, how it will examine the trade direction of Nepal. And these are the key findings I'll be talking about in today's presentation. The first one is impact on GDP, volume of imports, and export of commodities for Nepal. And if we look here, the tariff removal looked quite promising here, with a GDP increase of 1.3%, 1.31% for BIMSTEC, and 1.31% for SAFTA and BIMSTEC. And if we look at the combined effect of both tariff and non-tariff removal, we can see that the percent change is same, like 1.04% for all three different scenarios. However, in terms of $1 million, it was like a little bit different with some couple $100. I mean, couple $1,000, not $100. So based on this finding, we can say that only the tariff, if the tariff removal was like done, or like it is achieved, we can say that the country's GDP will be raising little more than the combined experimental shock. And if we look at the welfare decomposition for Nepal, we can see that again, like the it is quite promising for SAFTA scenario than other two scenarios. And coming to the impact on trade balance, so this is only for like tariff and anti-AMS removal. So if we look here, we can see that the trade balance is pretty good for paddy rice, vegetable fruits, tobacco, like beverages and tobacco, wood products, paper products, and other manufacturing products. As Nepal has, or like we can say, like Nepal's staple food is paddy rice, vegetable fruits, and all. So we can say that the country can be self-sufficient in these sectors if they are removing both tariffs and anti-AMS. If we look at the industrial supply of commodities, we can see that the textile industry has boomed very miraculously while compared to other sectors. There was very negligible change in cereal grains and meat products, while the food products and dairy had like negative impact. Not much, but it is still not growing. So if we look at the impact on private household demand for imports of commodities, we can say that except for dairy and food products, all other sectors have negative demand. That means the country, the households, the private household does not have any demand for other sectors except for food products and dairy products. So this looks quite promising to me. So what are the like conclusion I acquired from this study is that GDP of Nepal can be increased under all three different scenarios, and there is a positive increase in trade balance for majority of sectors, with lowest being the other agri sector. In all the three scenarios, Nepal could benefit due to increased export, positive trade balance, and decreased import for a majority of commodities considered in the model. And this study could be a breakthrough for the policymakers of the country to strengthen its trade policies and revise the existing ones. And Nepal should look at feasible ways to implement the removal of tariffs and anti-AMS at its earliest convenience for making the country self-reliant and economically prosperous. These are some of the references I used, and thank you. And thank you for listening to me. Sorry about the technical issues I just got for presenting. Thank you, and I'm open for questions.
Yes, thank you for your nice presentation and the journey we made to Nepal right now. This beautiful picture in the end. And thank you also for your flexibility to move your presentation forward. So I will open the floor now for questions. But maybe in the meantime, as people think about their question, I can ask one question of verification. So when you estimate your NTMs with the gravity approach, do you work on the tariff line level, at the 6-digit tariff line level, or do you work on the aggregated level of the model? Do you estimate them in the detailed database and then aggregate them to the model, or do you estimate them at a higher level?
No, what we did is we estimated the coefficients of Ad-valorem equivalence, and then we used those data in the GTAP model before running the simulations. Maybe I didn't get your question. If I'm not answering it well, maybe you can repeat as many times.
So did you estimate? So you aggregate them as you aggregate your NTMs to the model level, or you estimate them directly on the aggregated level? You have all the details in the database. That was
Yeah, I
that
have
I'm
also
wondering
details in
about.
my paper. If you go through the appendix, like how I estimated them on like the sectoral level for all the 30 sectors I did in the study. They were like individual AVs number for all the sectors, and then I used that. I use that data in the GTAP model,
Okay.
and then only I run the scenarios. I'm not sure if I'm answering you correctly.
Yeah, many thanks.
Is it okay?
Yes.
Sorry,
Okay, so in the meantime, Home Punt, you are raising your hand. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Well, it's a nice presentation, a nice work. Congratulations. There may be a couple of points that you may like to consider. Tariff revenue is a major source of income for the government in Nepal. So if tariffs are removed, that will have revenue implications for government. And so the overall economy-wide impact, when you calculate that, we need to consider what alternative taxes would be applied to keep the government going. And those taxes will have some kind of negative impacts, deadweight loss. So, so some kind of budget balance can be maintained. When you use GTAP, you don't have those accounts explicit. So you have to do a little bit of work there. And the other thing is when Nepal goes into a complete free trade kind of mode in this country, in the region, will that be reciprocated by other countries for good? And if they don't do that, if they don't do, and Nepal is doing from its side, there is a risk. So that's another strategic issue, because these issues are coming up quite a number of times. Plus, there are subsidy issues in the trading partners. And so there could be something that you may like to consider down the track. That's it. Thanks very much. You might like to give your view.
Thank you so much for your suggestions. Yeah, this could be our like next paper or like next way forward to another level of research, because this was pretty new topic for me. So it was the one I could achieve right now. So we still need to work on that. Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your comments.
Okay. Bushra, you have a question as well.
Yes. Thank you, Janine. Thank you, Gita, for the wonderful presentation. My first question was what Janine already asked you about did you estimate at the product, detailed product HS level or tariff line? So I let that go. And my second point is when you were running through the methodology slide, I heard you saying NTBs, then you kind of used NTM throughout the presentation. So I'm wondering if you are constraining the NTMs to the NTB in the gravity model, because there's a difference between NTM and NTBs, because NTMs have both trade facilitating and impeding effect. Unless you are constraining them in the gravity model, they are NTMs and not NTBs. So when you are recommending as well that removing NTMs can make the country self-sufficient and all those recommendations, are they stemming from the fact that you are constraining the NTMs to be NTB, and the complete removal of NTBs, of course, will increase the welfare? That's my question.
Yeah, thank you, Bushra. So it's like it's NTMs. Sorry if I have, I just got a slip of tongue and said NTBs on that slide, but it's NTMs. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah.
So Are there any other questions? If there are no more questions, I just saw in the chat that you got a really positive feedback. I think there are a lot of comments like nice presentation.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for joining on this session. Like it is session 46, and let's be till the end. That's what I can say.
Yeah, thank you. So then I might ask, I would like to welcome Mohammed Omer Khan in the session. I'm happy that you are here with us in the session right now. And we are very much looking forward to your presentation. So the presentation will be about the impact of UK-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, options for the UK and Japan. Yes, Mohammed, then I would like to give you the word.
Well, thank you so much for having me in this conference. And it's really an honor for me for being in this 25th annual conference on global economic analysis, because I being a graduate of economics, having a background of bachelor's, and it's really an honor for me because it's a big platform where almost all of the scholars having background of masters and PhDs present their work. Well, let me introduce myself. My name is Mohammed Omer Khan, and I have my, background of economics. And today I'm going to present a paper on impact of UK-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, option for UK and Japan. I hope you all are hearing me clearly. Can you listen me?
Yes, yes, we do.
All right. So let's go ahead. First of all, I would like to thank you all for giving me your precious time. And the first slide is all about thank you, because the time you guys are giving me, it's really important for you and for me at the same time. So let's go ahead and talk about Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. So, well, we all know that before the happening of Brexit, like UK was part of European Union from last decades, and after that the UK succeeded in withdrawal from European Union. At that time, the GDP and the economic productivity of UK was extraordinary. And in meanwhile, COVID pandemic came into existence, which dropped the GDP and economic productivity of United Kingdom. So, at the same time, even UK negotiated and proposed for withdrawal from European Union. It was almost in, and if they withdrew in 2021. Well, we all know that UK is proposing and going ahead to join the trade, to join mega trade agreements. Mega regional trade agreements, and they're going to step towards big agreements like CPTPP. You can also check and go through a link which I have shared in the paper. And I have also wrote a paper on that, so you can go through it. So in this slide, you can see the importance and the top and exporting and importing sources, exporting destination and import sources of United Kingdom. So over here, the importance of Japan for UK is really makes a really important role. Japan has 1.78%. UK's exports of about 1.7% goes to Japan. At the same time, 1.61% of UK's imports come from Japan. Now the question is, why UK is interested to have an agreement with Japan? Why not with some other country? So to answer this question, it is basically the reason behind it is, the first reason is that UK will have a platform to join CPTPP, as Japan is already a member of CPTPP, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. All right, so UK, after joining with Japan, it would have an edge to join CPTPP. Having an agreement with Japan would be on the same agreements which were signed between European Union and Japan. So UK will be currently following the same agreement. So if you look into the commodities, so we have aggregated it using WITS as a source. We have used it as a source. So over here, the manufacturing commodities are about 59%, whereas meat and livestock are exported to Japan by 1.24% and textile 2.2% and so on. At the same time, UK imports from Japan UK imported from Japan in 2019 by 65.70% of manufacturing commodities, whereas textile and clothing were imported for about 1.08% and so on. If we look into the gains to UK, if UK joined comprehensive economic partnership agreement with Japan, so the first one is to overcome the unprecedented economic situation which happened in COVID-19. You all know that the situation, not just UK, but in the global world, the situation and the recession took place. So the UK economy, at the same time, UK economy also dropped. The unemployment increased and economic productivity decreased, and other economic indicators. So, what would be the benefits? What are the benefits expected by from this agreement? So, the first one is, as I discussed, to overcome the hurdles which happened by COVID-19. The second one is it would create gains in all manufacturing regions, especially Scotland, Ireland, and so on. Similarly, in long run, the trade costs comprised by UK-Japan CEPA are expected to raise the UK-Japan trade by 50% as compared to 2019. It would decrease by 50%. You know, the tariff rate, as the tariff rate decreases, so the cost would also decrease. And similarly, there will be diversified linkages. Employment opportunities will increase. The real income and prices would also be affected. It would also appreciate, which would have a good impact on the country and on the public. What is the significance of this study? Well, the importance of this study is it is really important because the consequences of free trade policy, along with facilitated trade on macroeconomic indicators, especially sectors like macroeconomic, especially sectors, productivity sectors. As well as it would productivity sectors and the economic indicators that it would have highly effect. After the Brexit, the economy of UK has depreciated. I mean, it has declined. It has compressed. So, to overcome this, the UK-Japan agreement would have a positive impact and implication on the economy of UK. So up till now, no study has been found on UK-Japan liberalized trade policy between 1996 to 2021. If we look into this bar graph, so if I zoom it for you, so over here we can see that UK's tariff on Japan. If a person of a commodity or a commodity is imported from Japan, so about 8.99% of tariff is incorporated or levied on it, whereas 8.93% of tariff is incorporated and levied on meat and livestock, and so on. So we can say that UK incorporated and lived about more tariffs than Japan. Well, if we look into the previous studies, so we have positive indication. The previous studies give us a positive indication that liberalized trade policy have a positive impact on countries' economic condition, especially real GDP, real exports, imports, and factors. So what are the methodology? What is basically the methodology? Over here, we use general equilibrium method, and we know that general equilibrium method is totally based on Walrasian general equilibrium, and it is used to generate the insights regarding various policies, especially taxation or trade. We use different simulation. We project different data. So over here we have GTAP version 10A. We have used GTAP version 10A, and then we have used extension of my GTAP, and we have used my GTAP, which is extension of GTAP model, 65 sectors. We have about 18 real factor returns and have multiple household. At the same time, if we look into my GTAP model, so the difference between GTAP model, standard GTAP model, and my GTAP model is that in GTAP model, we have usage of social accounting metrics, whereas in my GTAP, we have separate government, separate government and private household, and there is a linkage between household and government income or transfer of payments. Like we know from where will the payment is coming and where it is flowing, and know which commodities. Now, what are the main simulation in this research? Well, the simulation in this research, the first one is elimination of overall bilateral tariff on all commodities, whereas on stark contrast, we have the second simulation, which is between UK-Japan free trade policy with a specific scenario or simulation of trade facilitation of 5%. Now, if we look into the outcomes using CGE modeling, that is GTAP, so we have two tables. The upper one is totally based on UK-Japan free trade agreement, elimination of overall tariff, whereas on the second simulation is based upon simulation 1 plus bilateral trade facilitation of 5%. Now, if we compare both of the real GDP for UK and Japan, so UK GDP has both of the GDP for UK has a vast and big gigantic gap, and so we can say that the UK would have benefits of $1,411 million if they have an additional scenario or simulation of bilateral trade facilitation of 5%. Similarly, in the case of Japan, they would have a gains of 924.5 million, whereas on this on contrary side, if they have free trade agreement, so it would have for the UK's real GDP will grow by 130 million, and Japanese would grow by $51 million. And if you look into the real exports, so there exists a big difference between their exports. So we can say the bilateral trade facilitation along with free trade agreement would be a beneficial and would be a better option for UK as well as Japan. So this, as this model is a global model, so we have also added all the countries which would be positively implicated or negatively implicated by this agreement. Now, this is the impact on government income. If these both agreement comes into account, so by first agreement or the first simulation, that is free trade agreement between the both countries, the income of government would increase by 0.505%, whereas UK's economy income would drop by 0.028%. At the same time, the simulation 2 depicts the trade facilitation along with free trade agreement. So Japanese government income would increase by 0.162%, and at the same time, the UK's would increase by 0.174%. So we can say that it would be a beneficial, and you would be at a benefits if they sign this agreement mutually, the second one. At the same time, if we look into the GDP components, which are consumption, investment, government, imports, exports, etc. Total. So we have about 5 components of GDPs. So the first one reveals that it will not have that much gap or gains if the simulation 1 is implemented. At the same time, if simulation 2 is implemented, then the gains would be maximum. That is, the consumption would increase for UK by 5,203 million, and for Japan it would be about 4,828.75 million. And then investment would also increase. The investment, the difference between investment and the investment for both cases is gigantic and marvelous. So if we look into the simulation 1 UK's investment and simulation 2 UK's investment, so there is a difference of almost 1200, approximately 12 to 1300 million, and at the same time there is a difference of about 1000 or 1500, more than 1500 million. I'm not that sure about it because it would be calculated through a calculator. Thereafter, if we look into the government income, so the government income would depreciate for UK by 17 million, which is a critical situation, alarming situation for UK. However, the Japanese government income would appreciate by 464 million. At the same time, UK's income would increase and Japanese would also increase if they incorporate or implement both free trade agreement or free trade agreement and the trade facilitation. Similarly, imports would decrease in both cases. If the imports and decreases in both cases, it would be a beneficial option. They would be benefited. As an export, if we look into this, so the exports are increasing and exports are higher than the simulation 1. In total, if we look the gains from simulation 2, that is trade facilitation along with free trade agreement, would be 6,095.47 million for UK and 7,923.25 million for Japan. So if we look into the industrial productivity for UK and Japan, so UK-Japan free trade agreement would boost processed food, textile, wearing apparel, as well as utility consumption productivity in UK. In case of Japan, productivity of light manufacturing and utility consumption would also elevate, while the other would depreciate. Now, in case of trade facilitation along with free trade policy, it would boost the productivity of processed food, wearing apparels, utility consumptions, and capital goods, whereas Japanese would face a productivity growth in manufacturing, especially light manufacturing, utility consumption, and transportation and communication. If we look into the real factor returns, so there are various they are disaggregated and they are marked in various descriptions. Well, we have land, labor, and capital along with natural resources. So the total appreciation and gains the UK would have is 21.67%, whereas Japan would have a depreciation or decline by 81.80%, which is an alarming situation for Japan. And similarly, the UK's real factor return would depreciate or decline by 1.23%, whereas Japan would decrease by 2.19%. So at this time, both are negative values. However, the real GDP as well as the other economic indicators are gaining and are increasing. So this would have an effect. However, the labor capital would have a positive gains because the data shows the result shows positive gains. Now, what are the conclusion and policy recommendation? What have we basically concluded? Simulation, we have two, as we discussed, we have two simulation. The first one is about elimination of entire bilateral tariff between UK and Japan. We have also looked into the impact of this simulation on the entire world, especially on the countries which are highly or maximally or maximizely affected. So there are most of developing countries. if we look into the conclusion of simulation 1, that is UK-Japan Free Trade Agreement, so the elimination of entire bilateral tariff would have magnificent gains in GDP, trade value, trade value or trade balance for both countries, as well as government income. However, the process and the result would be in long run. Now, if we look into this,
sorry, 2 minutes.
Yeah, sure. So if we come into the simulation 2, so the implication of trade facilitation is gigantic at maximum aspects, including the real GDP, trade values, and government revenue, as well as components of GDP and the productivity at sectoral level in UK and Japan. Additionally, technological variation and growth, especially growth in digital world, would also elevate and escalate the both of the economies. What are the policy recommendations? So the implementation of free trade agreement along with trade facilitation would be the first policy recommended, whereas the UK-Japan free trade agreement would be the second one, because the implication and the trade values of trade facilitation is maximum than UK-Japan free trade agreement. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Mohammed, for your presentation. I would like to ask the audience if you have some questions or clarifications or something which you would like to know from Mohammed.
Yeah, sure, they can. Yeah, the floor is open.
Maybe while people are thinking about their questions, I just have one question for you. I would be interested how you model the trade facilitation. How do you implement that in your CGE model? What did you do?
Well, yeah, if we look into the CGE modeling and if we look into the GTAP software package, so there is a tool which is called AMS tool.
Okay.
Yeah, AMS tool. So if you look into my paper, so I have mentioned it over there too, which depicts the value. You know, trade facilitation is basically by lowering the tariff or the restrictions. By lowering the restrictions, for example, we have trade barriers. So by eliminating the obstacles, so we use trade facilitation in that case. And there is a tool called AMS tool. So that's why we have used 5%. We cannot, if we look into the projection, if we go for 100% trade facilitation, it could have a big impact on the world economy. However, we can't go for there because there are many products, there are many commodities which are restricted because at the same time the countries and the government needs revenue. So in order to obtain revenue, achieve revenue, we can't implement more, trade facilitation value or percentage by more than 5%.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I got that wrong in your presentation, because I thought that you, on the one hand side, in your simulation 1, you abolished all the tariffs. So every tariff revenue was gone in the first simulation.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
And in the second one, I thought you did both. You just eliminated tariffs and the trade facilitation, but you only did trade facilitation there, right?
No, and let me clear it for you. The first one, you are right, and the first one was totally based on trade the tariff elimination, right?
Yes.
While the second one was tariff elimination along with trade facilitation of 5%. There are two different, scenarios. The first one was simulation 1. The simulation 1 was without trade facilitation, whereas the simulation 2 is totally based on simulation 1 plus
so there is no tariff revenue in simulation 2 as well.
Yeah, that's why the impact is really extensive. If you look into the real GDP, so there is a big extensive, impact on both countries. And this is, I believe that this would be a really big platform for both of the countries.
Yeah, maybe that's another point I was wondering a bit, because the GDP effect as an absolute number looks sometimes really high, but in percentage terms, it's sometimes very low. I think additional trade liberalization for many countries has, in percentage terms, only very low GDP effects. But I don't know you presented do you know a percentage number out of that, or
I think
approximately something like, so
I think I have presented both. I have added both the percentage as well as, because in my research paper I add both. I don't remember I have added both or just one. I have added both. Yeah. So yeah, if we look into this, so you are right, the number is not that much big. However, in monetary values, so in monetary terms, the value is too much. So over here, if we look into the details, so real GDP, the growth is totally about 0.05%.
Yeah.
It seems very small amount. It seems very small. However, in monetary values, the value is too big. Like, we know that it's totally based on GTAP software package is totally based and take into account the currency in million. So so it would have at least it would have a positive impact, not negative. At least it is better than this the first simulation elimination one.
Yeah, thank you. So Zeynep, you raised your hand.
Yes, thank you, Mohammed, for this research and your presentation. I was wondering about the productivity results. Could you show them again?
The industrial productivity.
Yes, for simulation one. Okay.
Yeah. If you want, I can zoom it for you.
Yes, thank you. So yes, that's what I was wondering. So most of the sectors for UK and Japan have similar changes in productivity levels, but for light manufacturing, it's the opposite. Did you get a chance to look into that, or?
That's really incredible. I would say that's an incredible question. Well, I have also checked into the details, but if we look into this, if we get into the details, so you know, Japan is always good in production. Japanese productivity is always, marked as state of the art in the global world. So that's the reason behind, and that's the reason behind the productivity. In client productivity, it's about 840.63 million. So if we look into the paper, we are not just focusing in this industrial productivity on UK or Japan agreement, but the productivity is totally based on entire productivity, like all the products which are demanded by the local, as well as by UK, by UAE, by America. So if we are just assuming that if UK Japan bilateral free trade agreement takes place, the productivity of light manufacturing commodities would increase. Why? Because light manufacturing commodities would have would have higher demand. The first one demanding country is UK, as the tariff would be eliminated. So that's why the demand would, as the demand increase, the productivity would increase in this case.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the government revenue is increasing. Did I see that right?
Let me show you.
Thank you.
Yeah. In this case, if we look into the, if you can see my cursor, this is the data of simulation 1 and 2 for Japan. And then here it's after Japan, we have UK. And at the end, we have rest of world. So if we look into the Japanese and UK's economy, I mean, economic government income, so it appreciates for Japan. However, it depreciates or decreases. We can, the specific word could be used as declines. All right, so it declines for UK and it increases for Japan. At the same time, if we look into UK and Japan for simulation 2, which is totally based on trade facilitation, so both of the government income increases, and that's really it's a positive. It would have a positive impact on both of the countries. And now the question is why the government revenue or the income declines for UK. So to answer this question, we have also checked into details. So the productivity and the productivity has also declined for UK. So this could also be an answer, or you can say the in order to submit or conclude this thing. At the same time, if we look into, as I discussed, this model is a global model. So we have also checked and the impact on other countries. Other countries also include developing countries as well as the developed countries, and also rest of the world, which are aggregated. So the impact, yeah.
Yes. Oh, I was wondering about simulation 1, and you clarified that it's tariff liberalization from both Japan and UK. So the tariff revenue is gone for Japan as well, right? That's why I was wondering why in simulation 1 the government income from Japan was increasing. Maybe I was missing something.
Yeah, basically, as I discussed earlier. So as I said, if we look into the productivity, so the productivity table, as the graph I described to you, I told you that it's totally UK's Japanese products are high in demand. So as you know that as the demand increases, so how the income is generated, basically it's totally from taxes, tariffs, and main sources of government are these both, right? So as the commodities are exported to other countries, so or imported from other countries, so from the Japanese government income is also does increase. And whereas if we look into UK, so it declines, because if we look into the productivity graph, the productivity does not have that much big difference or gains from the simulation 1, whereas simulation 2 has a big gains from them.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
I just wonder, but if you stay with the slide, why the rest of the world is so highly negative? Is it do you have it as an aggregate in the model, or do you have more detailed results on that? If it's maybe more.
Sorry, I didn't got you.
The rest of the world has the highest negative impact, and I just wonder if these are maybe the least developed countries, some countries which are experiencing some trade diversion due to this agreement. So, but I'm not sure if you can see from your model or from your results what exactly is behind the rest of the world.
Well, we have basically this, GTAP model comprises of more than 100 countries. So we can't show or depict it or represent it in this slide. So what I did is I aggregated. Well, first of all, I ran the simulation, and when I saw the countries which had very less amount of negativity, or the compression or rescission from this agreement, then what I did was I just aggregated it into giving it title of rest of the world, because I knew that it had changes of less than, like over here we have countries which have changes of 0.028. All right, like it's UK. For Pakistan, we have about minus 0.0092%, right? So there in GTAP, after running of the simulation, like countries or in the belonging to rest of world, they had value from ranging from minus 0.000, like there were 4 digits of zeros. So if we did it at like roundabout, so even though after 4 digits of decimals, even though it couldn't show any digits, so that's why we aggregated it. And yeah, you're right. There exists trade diversion. If a country produces something which is cheaper than a second country, then trade diversion could be a main reason, because every country wants something or something to be imported, which cost them less. I hope you got my point.
Thank you. So
Yeah, hi Mohammed. It was a great presentation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, as a new CZ model aspirer, I have a question like, how did you incorporate their facilitation of 5% along with removal of tariffs in GTAP model? I'm talking about how did you wrote the shock commands, because I'm new to this and it looks pretty interesting.
Well, as you are new, so I'm also new candidate. But the thing is that GTAP, this is you are on a very interesting platform. But the thing is that I'm over here from this is my second presentation. Before this, I had a presentation in IRSA Congress conference, which was held in COVID-19. So let me tell you about it. If we look into the details, like we have, let me show you the bar graphs. It shows the data. This is the data. What UK implement on Japan, and what Japan implement or levied, what kind of tariffs are levied on UK. Well, what we basically do is we open, like we go to run GTAP. All right, it's a licensed software. You get you purchase the data for about thousands of dollars, and then we go and we give them specific shocks. If you are interested to decrease the tariffs by, for example, 50%, right? And then you go on the specific commodity. For example, if we talk about grain crops, or here we have shortage of time, otherwise I would have taught you how this whole process came into existence, like from how this shock is given, how the results come into existence. There were I can show it to you after the conference. There is no point of stress. Well, so what we do basically is, if you are want to decrease the tariff by 50%, so you in the shock value, you go and add minus 50%. As you're decreasing the tariff by 50%, so then you will add a digit or a sign, a sign minus. So it will automatically show you below the table, below the box, the value of tariff after declining it by minus 50%. In the same way, then whatever commodities you are giving the shocks, you go and proceed with that, and then you can run the simulation. After running the simulation, you go to the results column, and you can see a bundle of results. It would not just be about real GDP, real exports, real imports, not just about terms of trade even, but there would be number of results. Then it depends on you what variables you are interested. If you are interested on, for example, prices, then you can pick the table of prices and generate a good table. But I would say or suggest that you should go for incredible and appealing charts rather than tables, because I believe that tables are like boring and the charts are impressive. Yeah, so this is the entire process, and I hope you have understood. If you have any question, you can just drop me a message on the portal.
Okay, sounds good.
Yes, thank you for the discussion and for the presentation, Mohammed.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was nice having you both, and thank you so much for your time. And it was really an honor for me for being part of this conference. As I belong to I just graduated with an economics degree, like I'm a bachelor's. I am having a background of bachelor's, so it's an honor for me. Thank you so much. If I would say, if anyone has any question related to this, so you can message me on the portal, or you can even send me an email. Well,
Yes,
Yeah,
many thanks.
at the end I have mentioned my email address, and even though my co-author is also in this email address, so I would also thank my co-author. He is also a member of GTAP, so he has played very well, and he has also helped me, extensively in presenting as well as in writing, impressive and really well. And thank you so much, Dr. Amir Khan, if you are listening. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then we will move now to the next presentation. So may I ask Bushra Faizi to open your presentation? She will talk about the estimating protection in the service sector. And she will also talk about a PPML analysis, something similar we have seen in the previous presentations so far, but I'm very much looking forward now to see it applied in the service sector. So, Bushra, please, you have the word.
Thank you, Janine. Can you see the slides?
We see it not in the presentation mode.
Okay, I think it's fine now.
Yeah, it's fine now. Okay. So.
I'm presenting the paper, Estimating Protection in Services Sector, a PPML analysis. The work is part of my PhD research, which I wrote along with my supervisor and co-supervisor, Dr. Naseem and Dr. Iskander at Hamad bin Khalifa University, Qatar Foundation. We are basically working empirically to estimate the tariff equivalent of the non-tariff measures in the services sector. So I'll start by the brief introduction of the trade in services sector. The General Agreement on Trade in Services divides the trade in services by the mode of supply, which are the mode one is cross-border supply, is like the merchandise trade where the service produced in one country is consumed in another. And mode two is consumption abroad, where the consumer moves to the producer economy to avail the services. And mode three is commercial presence, where we talk about MNCs and where the FDI comes in. And mode four is the natural presence, where the producer moves to the consumer economy. I'm explaining this because in the analysis, I'm only considering mode one, which is cross-border supply, and mode two, consumption abroad. We are using the GTAP 10 data, which is based on the IMF statistics, which takes into account only mode one and mode two of the services sectors. So what are the non-tariff measures in the services sectors? The trade in services is not subject to the tariff. So the only form of protection and only form of regulation are the non-tariff measures. The non-tariff measures are categorized into the 5 policy areas by Services Trade Restrictiveness Index of OECD and the World Bank. The first is restriction on foreign entry, barrier to competition. Okay, I'm trying to minimize the Zoom window, sorry. And the third is restriction on the people movement, regulatory transparency, and other discriminatory measures. So the non-tariff measures in the services include like capital requirement for the telecom industry, foreign equity cap for the insurance companies, nationality requirement for executives in different services sector, license requirement. These are some of the examples of the non-tariff measures. So what they do is the non-tariff measures and the regulation in services sector restrict the supply or increase the cost, which impedes trade ultimately. So as I said, this empirical work estimates the tariff equivalent AVEs of the non-tariff measures, which is defined as proportional increase in the domestic price due to the policy relative to the scenario where there is no regulation. The estimation technique for the AVEs is different in the services and goods sector. Because the services are highly differentiated and intangible, so the usual methodologies, for example, the price gap models and all of that what we use extensively in the literature for the goods trade is not applicable to the services trade. Also, I would like to talk about the welfare analysis and the interpretation of AVEs. The higher AVEs are not reflecting the welfare distortion, which is very important thing while interpreting AVEs. Because it reads in the Karots paper, for example, that NTM affects both supply curves through the various costs associated with the compliance and demand curves through signaling or catalyst effect. So this thing becomes more clear when we talk about the NTMs in the goods sector, which has application of trade impeding and trade facilitating. And we really cannot infer that higher AVEs are distortionary. Okay, so a brief discussion of the literature. From the conversation in the literature, we learned that the price raising effect translated in the form of AVEs is higher in the developing countries compared to the developed world. And much work has been done on OECD countries. There is a limited empirical discussion, if I say, calculating the AVEs in the services sector. One part of the literature talks about the AVEs in the services sector using the STRI index data, which is the Services Trade Restrictiveness Index. There are certain limitations mentioned in the earlier papers about the STRI approach, that it is resource consuming and it's basically assigning an arbitrary codes to the qualitative information on the regulations. Also, there are papers using the CGE model, modeling the regulation using import and export taxes and ICE cost. We are relying on the indirect approach, which is used by PERC in 2002. The methodology can be accessed in the paper. Basically, what they do is the gravity model is run first, and then the residuals are obtained. And using those residuals, they calculate the AVEs as a reflective of protection, and they are translated into AVEs. The paper by Fontagni is addressing the limitations of the residual method, and instead using the fixed effect method with the OLS, again using the GTAP data, where they talk about the vulnerability of OLS to an unobserved effect. So the fixed effect captures the protection. And as we learn from the previous studies, and as also our colleagues discussed during the session about the PPML technique, which is the latest, and it is preferred over the OLS because of the accommodation of the zero threat values and its robustness. And also it is proved by researcher Faizi in 2015 that when we are using the PPML technique, it takes into account the structural gravity model, which is modeling also the multilateral resistance down. So this is the robust methodology and latest methodology to be used for the trade flows. So we are using the PPML technique and the GTAP time data to model the regulations in services sector, translated into AVEs. Okay, so the research question we're trying to answer in the paper is, what is the price raising effect of NTMs in the services sector and how it's linked with the development status of countries? The objective is to estimate the AVEs in the services sector using the updated data. The GTAP time data has the bilateral trade data in services for 2014 latest. So the contribution is, we are contributing to the limited empirical discussion of calculating tariff equivalent of NTM, specifically using the indirect approach, which we prefer over STRI approach. And by doing so, we are covering more countries and extended the analysis to more sectors, new sectors, which were not part of the previous GTAP database. Okay. So the methodology includes, first step is the baseline gravity model. We modify the gravity model according to the specification of the our work. So as mentioned by many colleagues, that how gravity model works is we are basically regressing the trade data on gravity variables and including distance as well. So we have dependent variable, which is bilateral trade data in services from country I to J, and we have distance variable, and we have GDPs of both countries in equation first, and D represents the dummy, which includes gravity variables, GDP, and gravity variables like common colony and free trade regional trade agreements and border effect. So this sectoral regression that we modify according to our study is what we do is we are constraining the importer's GDP to 0.8 and we are omitting the exporter GDP. It's actually technical to look at it this way, but I'll try to keep it simple in a way that we are including the fixed effect, as I mentioned. So the GDP is already captured in the fixed effect. But the reason of constraining the importer GDP is we are using the importer fixed effect to calculate AVEs in the next step. So when we are constraining the GDP, the fixed effect is only reflecting the information on protection. This is how it's interpreted in the empirical analysis. So what we are getting out of the gravity estimation is the fixed effects of importer and exporter. And we are interested to use the importer fixed effect to be used for the calculation of AVEs in the next step. So what we do is we see the importer fixed effects and we extract all the data where we choose the benchmark countries, which is a hypothetical situation of a free trade. As per se, it is the regulations are not directly observed. That's why it's called indirect method. So after the gravity estimation, we choose a benchmark country, which is a hypothetical situation of a free trade, and the rest of the countries are compared to the benchmark in each sector. So the criteria of the benchmark countries is in each sector, the country importer with the highest fixed effect serve as a benchmark. So we proceed to the next step, which is we calculate using equation 2 the AVEs for each country in each sector. In each sector, we compare the rest of the countries with the benchmark of the sector in discussion. So here we use the elasticity of substitution to equal to 5.6 following the literature. I'll talk about more when we move to the results section. Okay, so we are using the gravity variable from CEPA and the bilateral trade in services are from the GTAP 10 for 2014 and the GTP is from WDI. Okay. This slide talks about it's all the sectors which are included in the GTAP 10. It's quite helpful and includes more sector compared to the GTAP 9, and it has 20 services sector. In the analysis, we are talking about 1 to 19. We don't take into account leveling based on the fact that it has a large number of missing values, and we tried to run it, but it was not significant in our case. So this is the description of the sector which is provided in the paper as well. Okay, so I'm explaining the results of equation 1, which is the gravity estimation, constraint regression, and very interesting result that we see is distance has a positive effect. Okay, we explain it in a way that one important point is distance in the services sector is interpreted differently than in the agriculture and manufacturing sector, where it is the proxy for the transportation cost, while distance is seen as a proxy for information cost when it comes to the services sector. Also, from the literature, we see that the distance effect tends to decrease when it comes to PPML as compared to the OLS regression. We take the simple example of education just to explain how the distance is positively related in our model. So as we talk about the 4 mode of services supply, mode 1 in the education sector is the e-learning. And the mode 2 in education sector is where the consumer moves to the producer economy. So when we take the example of education sector, it is convincing to see that the e-learning doesn't really, distance doesn't really impede when it comes to the mode 1 of the education. And when we see mode 2 and when we look to the real economy, for example, I take one case where I see that how many students in the United States are studying from different countries. So when you see the figures, the Chinese students are the one in majority studying in the US, which also we see that many developing countries students are going to the UK and the US and other countries, which the distance is larger, but it's not impeding. In fact, it's facilitating in a way that they have the best education system. So also we see that the global trade data shows that these figures are for 2015 to 17, that the global trade in mode 1 is 27% and the global trade in mode 2 is 10%. So the reason I'm discussing these figures here is to highlight the fact that how the globalization and technology facilitates trade in services to overcome the information cost, which we can see that mode 1 is, as we see, is more of technology dependent mode of supply. And the third variable, we see regional trade agreement and border effect. I'll not explain them because they're consistent with the literature and the increased trade. Okay, so now we get the fixed effect. And the next process is to identify countries in each sector who have the highest fixed effect that are serving as a benchmark. So important point here to note is we are using the elasticity of substitution, which is 5.6. So we tried with different level of elasticities, and here's the thing. When we are changing the elasticity, irrespective of the figure, the benchmark countries remain the same, because the highest fixed effect countries, even if we try with different elasticity, the AVEs calculate to 0. This is kind of a technical point, but the main thing is if the elasticity, if differs, the relative ranking of the country remains the same with different level of AVEs, if I may put it in a simple words. So we are setting the benchmark countries, and in each sector we see that developed countries are serving as a benchmark, which includes some of the oil producing countries, the OIC members, Middle East countries. But most of the countries that serve as a benchmark in at least 2 sectors are very high income countries: Luxembourg, Ireland, and Singapore. I see that when we see the GDP per capita data for 2014, Luxembourg is the highest per capita country as of 2014. So we see that they are least restricted countries in all the sectors serving as a benchmark. Again, the important point is the AVEs are relative and not absolute. And the second thing is, when we say that 0 AVEs, it doesn't mean that there is no regulation in place. Instead, the regulation in place is not restricting the trade. That's how we interpret the AVEs. Okay, so we are moving to the next step where we will compare the rest of the countries with the benchmark countries in each sector. And here we obtain the AVEs for every country and each sector. This figure plots the average AVEs in each sector, the average of all the countries. So we see that the gas sector has the highest AVE, average AVE, and the transport sector has the lowest average AVE. And some of the sectors, including construction sector, the AVEs, average AVEs are also high. And health and water and education are relatively lower. Also, communication is lower. Okay, so what we did was after calculating the, again, there are a lot of countries and 19 sectors, 121 countries. So we get figures for every sector, every country. Then we made 2 tables, like the top 10 open economies and top 10 restrictive economies. So based on the ranking of AVEs, then from those 2 tables, we compare that how many countries are frequently appearing in both the tables. And from where we got this table, and we categorized the 5 countries as open economies based on the entire sample, and 5 economies as restrictive economies, again, based on the entire sample. And as I mentioned,
2 minutes reminder. Sorry.
Sure, I can make it. So Luxembourg, Singapore, Belgium, and Ireland are open economies, and the developing economies, Bangladesh, Zimbabwe, Pakistan, and Tajikistan are restrictive economies. Okay, so what we conclude from the discussion and analysis is protection is heterogeneous across the sectors. Distance is no longer impeding mode 1 and mode 2 in our analysis, which is consistent with some of the studies talking about 2 or 3 sectors. The liberalized sector is air transport that we said, and the restrictive is the gas one, which is also consistent with the studies I just mentioned. And also the important point I would like to mention is we compared the AVEs with the previous studies using the OLS and the same fixed effect technique. So what we get is the relative ranking of the countries are exactly the same what they did for GTAP 9 data. But our AVEs are very high compared to the OLS estimation that they did. So we are very confident that the estimates are okay based on the fact that within 2 years, like from the GTAP 9, which is for 2011, and GTAP 10, which is for 2014, it is highly unrealistic to say that the regulations have increased manifold, so we are getting higher AVEs. Instead, the higher AVEs in our case are due to the PPML technique compared to the OLS technique, and not due to the policy changes, because the relative ranking of the countries is exactly the same, and the open countries remain open and the restrictive countries remain restricted. So yeah, the future research, I would say that AVEs we can use to plug in the CGE model for the variable analysis, and hopefully I'm gonna do that in my next project. Thank you for listening. And I would like to thank GTAP community for helping me a lot in understanding the data and being helpful throughout my research, and the organizers of the conference giving me opportunity to hear the feedback and improve the paper. Thank you.
Many thanks, Bushra, for your presentation. Now I would like to open the floor for the discussion. Zeynep, please go ahead.
Thank you, Bushra, for this extensive research and your presentation. I just wanted to make a comment that it would be great to see a comparison of welfare results, like you said, between the old the OLS estimates and then your updated estimates. It's always the case that these elasticities and these tariffs, they have a huge effect on trade flows and welfare results, and it'd be great to see how your updated estimates will affect the results. So thanks. Be looking forward to your next research.
Yeah. Thank you, Zeynep. And if you see my paper, I provide the comparison graph with the CEPA paper, which is done in using the GTAP 9 data. But I'll improve on that, and I'll thank you for the comment. I'll elaborate more.
So in the previous presentations, we saw, we talked about the aggregation procedure about AVEs. So what did you choose for your analysis? And yeah, you can say a word about that.
This is a good question. So my PhD research, whole of it is, first part is on the goods sector and second part is the services sector. So this question is very much related to the HS product of agriculture and manufacturing sector, and does not seems to be applied on the services sector due to the fact that the product line or tariff line AVEs we calculate for the HS detailed product level. And in services sector, I simply don't like, there we use the original information on the NTMs applied on the HS products. But here I am just extracting the information on AVEs from the fixed effect and only using the trade values. I am not using any information on the regulations applied in each sector. So the fixed effect or the proxy for the protection.
Okay, and so you aggregate as you for your slide in the results and discussion section where you present the average protection by sector, you just aggregate them with the value of trade then.
Yes, it is like for example, transport sector, I have AVEs of 121 countries. So I take average of 121 countries, and that is the average AVE of transport sector.
Mm-hmm.
I think I answered your question.
Yeah, and I think what it's really interesting, it's also a comment now to your results, is this, that the gas sector is so highly affected by NTMs, because at the moment, due to this Ukrainian war, I think the gas sector is highly discussed here in everywhere in the world and also in Europe. And we just think about how to get our gas from other countries at the moment. So it really would be very interesting if this sector of these NTMs are hindering the gas imports from other countries than Russia, or if there's a huge difference between Russia NTM on gas and other countries, and if this is also influenced by the distance or maybe the pipelines and the how they are constructed. I don't know if this is also influenced, or is it just the procedure at the border, like administrative things which have to be done. What comes into that 440% NTM? And do you have any information or ideas about how this might differ between countries in the world?
Yeah, this is very interesting point. But the dilemma is when we are looking into this empirical paper, none of them delves right into the real economy and talks about what are the things behind it, which is kind of unrealistic as well. Given the nature of the services trade, it is really hard to get into the bilateral things, how it is transported and what are the hindrance in actives. And what we can do is we are hoping for the GTAP to update the data so that we can look into the recent years and we can make some calculations because I'm talking about 2014.
Okay. Yeah, but still some of the non-tariff measures might be still in place, or it might be still a picture which might have changed a bit, but not so dramatically, maybe in the last years from 2014 to the pre-Ukraine war era. So that's where you need to compare it. Yeah.
I'll look into it. This is very helpful.
Yeah. Thank you. So I just look into the chat. There's also, please can we have the support of the presentations? Thanks. Yeah.
I didn't get that.
I didn't get that too. I just read it. Maybe you can just.
Do you mean supporting kind of information or something, appendices, something like that?
Hello.
Yeah,
hi. Thanks for this topics and the other presentation, and thanks for this amazing organization of this conference. I mean by supports the PowerPoint, this presentation, if possible, and thank you very much.
the PowerPoint presentations, you will find them on the web. So if you go to the schedule of the agenda, you can just click a link, and then you will come directly to the page of the person who has presented, and there you will find the paper and also the PowerPoint presentation, because all of the presenters have uploaded them to the conference website before they presented. So.
Okay, thank you very much. And good luck for all.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I think we are coming to the end of this session then. And I'm really happy that I was allowed to share this one. I enjoyed all of the presentations a lot. I got a lot of new ideas and information out of that. And yeah, many thanks to all the presenters, many thanks to all the discussants. And now I would like to maybe mention that we have a plenary session after this. And then we are almost finished with the conference, and I hope to see you next year, maybe in person, and meet you there with another presentation in the next year conference venue. So yes,
thank you.
Say goodbye to
you.
you. Hopefully see you next year or earlier, maybe somewhere else.
Why not? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks,
Goodbye.
Janine.